The house was quiet. Too quiet. She stood in the narrow hallway, staring at the half-packed boxes and the muted sunlight filtering through the curtains. Everything smelled of dust and time. Old memories settled like a fine layer over every surface. Her mother was gone, and the emptiness felt heavier than the furniture, heavier than the walls themselves. She had not been prepared for the stillness, the absence of her mother's voice in the house she had known all her life. And yet, grief was not just sadness. It was anger, regret, and a slow, burning frustration at years of distance she could never reclaim. They had lived together but apart. Words had been left unsaid, questions left unanswered, gestures of love left incomplete. As she moved through the room, her hand brushed against something hard behind a stack of folded blankets. She bent down and pulled out a small wooden box. It was old, with a deep brown finish worn smooth by time. It had a metal clasp, and across the top, written in her mother's handwriting, were 4 words that made her heart tighten. "Do not open this." Her breath caught. She stared at it, the weight of curiosity and fear pressing against her chest. The box had been hidden deliberately. This was no accident. She could feel it, as if it were alive with the secrets her mother had carried all those years. She wanted to put it back. Some doors were never meant to be opened, she thought. And yet, the box seemed to call to her, whispering promises of truth and understanding she had never had. She sat on the edge of the bed, placing it on her lap, turning it over in her hands. The clasp was sturdy, but with a small click, it opened. Inside, the air smelled faintly of ink and memory. She peered inside and found neatly tied bundles of letters, faded photographs, and documents that had clearly been hidden away for decades. Each item seemed deliberate, carefully chosen to be preserved. Her mother had packed not just memories, but her life itself into this small wooden container. She hesitated. The weight of it all pressed on her chest. These were not just objects. They were pieces of a life she had never known. Each photograph, each letter was a story her mother had chosen not to tell. For a moment she felt fear. Fear of the truths waiting for her, truths that might shatter the foundation of her understanding. But curiosity, that insistent, unrelenting pull, overcame her hesitation. She picked up the first bundle, untied the string, and let the papers fall open. Her hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the sudden rush of connection to a past she had never been allowed to touch. This box was more than a container of objects. It was a doorway. A doorway into her mother's hidden life, into secrets, regrets, loves, and losses that had been carefully sealed away. The realization made her chest tighten. Everything she thought she knew about her mother, and about herself, was about to be rewritten. The house was quiet, but it felt alive now. Alive with the past that had been waiting, patient and unyielding, for her to find it. And as she lifted the first photograph, a shiver ran down her spine. The past had walked into her hands. And there was no turning back. She sat on the edge of the bed, the box open on her lap. The sunlight fell unevenly across the room, illuminating fragments of a life she had never known. Her fingers trembled as she reached for a stack of yellowed photographs tied together with faded ribbon. The first photograph was of her mother, young and radiant, laughing with a man she did not recognize. He looked calm, confident, and strangely intimate, as if they shared a world that had nothing to do with her father. She blinked, feeling her stomach twist. How could she have never known this? Another photograph showed her mother at a small seaside town, arms wrapped around the same man, both smiling at something unseen. The images were casual, tender, ordinary, but they carried the weight of secrets. Every smile, every glance seemed stolen from her, a private world her mother had lived in silence. She moved to the documents beneath the photographs. There were letters, carefully folded and sealed, and official papers that seemed impossibly old. Names, addresses, dates, all meticulously recorded, but some scratched out or altered. One document was a letter of resignation, signed by her mother, dated years before she had told her any of the stories that mattered. Her breath caught. These were not forgotten hobbies or trivial correspondences. They were pieces of a life she had never been allowed to touch. Her mother had lived fully, dangerously, and secretly. And then she saw it. The same name, appearing again and again in letters, photographs, and notes. A man who seemed as real and present as anyone in her own life. But he wasn't. At least he wasn't supposed to be. She knew no one by that name. No one in her family or her memories. A strange feeling crawled up her spine. Betrayal, curiosity, and awe all twisted together. How had her mother managed to carry this life in the shadows? How had she hidden it so completely? Her hand shook as she unfolded a letter written in her mother's trembling script. "I hope she never knows." The word stabbed her. Her mother had worried about her discovering this, had wanted to protect her. But she had waited too long. Now she held the proof, the living echo of a story never told, and the weight of it pressed down on her chest. One photograph in particular made her freeze. It was taken on a rainy street, her mother holding the man's hand tightly. They were running, smiling but soaked as if fleeing something, or someone. The image carried urgency, secrecy, and danger. Her mind raced. Who had they been running from? What had they been running to? A small journal at the bottom of the box caught her attention. The leather was worn soft, and the pages smelled faintly of rain and dust. She opened it carefully. Inside were records of meetings, names, and letters that referenced people she had never heard of. There were mentions of a life erased, promises made in fear, and hints that someone who was supposed to be gone might still exist. Her heart thumped hard. It was impossible. How could someone erased from memory, someone presumed dead or gone, still linger on these pages? The thought both terrified and fascinated her. The box had become more than a collection of old belongings. It was a map of a hidden life, a trail leading to truths she was not prepared for, yet could not turn away from. Her emotions roared. Betrayal, sadness, curiosity. Every revelation cut and healed at the same time. She wanted to close the box, to hide from the knowledge she had uncovered. But another part of her, the part that had always craved the truth, refused. Each photograph, each letter, each record told a story her mother had lived alone. And with every piece she uncovered, she realized that her mother had been protecting more than just herself. She had been protecting her. But protection came at a cost. As she carefully laid the letters back in their bundle, her mind raced with questions. Who was the man in the photographs? Why had her mother never spoken of him? And most importantly, was the story really finished, or was it still unfolding somewhere beyond the walls of the house? Her gaze drifted to the final envelope, sealed tight and heavier than the others. She hesitated. Something inside her whispered to leave it be, to let some secrets remain buried. But her curiosity, and the pull of a past she was only beginning to understand, would not be denied. She slid her finger under the flap. The box had offered her a window into a life never explained. And now it was about to offer her more than she could ever have imagined. The past was stirring, and she could feel it watching. She sank back into the chair, clutching the fragile journal she had found at the bottom of the box. The pages smelled faintly of rain and dust, like the remnants of a life hidden away from the world. Each line she read drew her deeper into her mother's past, revealing a woman she had never known. A young woman filled with hope, mistakes, and desires she had never been allowed to see. The letters were more than words. They were whispers of another life. They spoke of love, tender and forbidden, a connection that had been forced into shadows. Names were carefully abbreviated, places vaguely described, as though her mother feared even the ink might betray her. There were references to long nights of waiting, letters that never reached their intended recipients, and sacrifices made silently so that no one would be hurt. One page caught her eye. It was dated decades before her birth, written in a rush of emotion that left the handwriting shaky and uneven. Her mother spoke of a night that had changed everything, an event so urgent and frightening that it needed to be erased from memory. She had made a choice that altered the course of lives, yet no one outside her secret world had ever known. The weight of it pressed on the protagonist's chest. Her mother had not been a woman defined only by her role as parent. She had been a person with her own fears, longings, and mistakes. And she had carried them alone, behind the careful walls of silence. As she continued reading, the story became more vivid. She could picture the young woman standing on rain-slick streets, heart racing, clutching letters in her hand, torn between love and duty. She could feel the tension in her mother's words, the fear that a single misstep could destroy everything she held dear. Every secret had a price, and every sacrifice left a scar. It became clear why her mother had never shared this story. It was too dangerous, too painful, too revealing. And yet, those choices had shaped her own life in ways she had never realized. The silence that had frustrated her as a child had been built long before she existed, a protective barrier that had kept her safe, even if it left her confused and distant. The protagonist felt a mixture of anger and compassion. Anger at the years of distance and misunderstanding, and compassion for the impossible decisions her mother had been forced to make. The woman she had known as a mother was humanized in ways that were both beautiful and tragic. She had not been a perfect parent, she had been a survivor and a strategist of the heart. Among the letters she found hints of people who had disappeared from her mother's life, friends, lovers, confidants, whose absence had been explained away or ignored. The narrative implied danger, or at least the fear of it, and she realized that some of the erasures were deliberate. Her mother had carefully removed certain chapters from history, ensuring that no one could follow the trail, no one could see what she had chosen to hide. The more she read, the more the past felt present. She could almost hear the voices, feel the tension, smell the rain and smoke from streets long gone. The story was unfolding before her, yet it was not hers to rewrite, only to witness, to absorb, and to understand. By the time she set the journal aside, her chest was tight and her mind spinning. She understood, in a way she never had, that silence could be both protection and poison. Her mother had tried to protect her, yes, but in doing so she had left questions, mysteries, and a longing for truth that could not be ignored. The house felt smaller now, the walls pressing in with the weight of these unspoken histories. She realized that uncovering her mother's story would not be a gentle process. Every secret revealed carried emotional consequences, every truth uncovered reshaping what she thought she knew. And yet she could not stop. She could not close the box or turn away from the story that had been waiting for her. The past, alive in letters, photographs, and documents, demanded to be acknowledged. It had its own momentum, pulling her forward into questions she was not yet ready to answer. Her mother's life, hidden in plain sight, had become a mirror, reflecting choices, sacrifices, and silences that shaped the present. And as she stared at the photographs and letters once more, the young woman she had never met seemed to reach out to her, urging her to keep going. The story her mother never told was alive. It was waiting for her to walk into it, to understand it, and perhaps to face what was left unresolved. The journal lay open in her hands, the candlelight flickering across the faded ink. She had read hundreds of letters, examined dozens of photographs, traced the edges of documents that had been hidden for decades, but nothing had prepared her for this. A folded death notice slipped between the pages caught her eye. She picked it up, her hands trembling. The paper was official, stamped and signed. The name printed in bold letters matched the one that had appeared repeatedly in her mother's letters and photographs. The man she had never known, the man who had haunted the edges of her mother's life. And according to this document, he was dead. Her chest tightened. She read the notice again, unwilling to believe it, but the words did not change. It declared him deceased. The date was decades old. He had been gone before she was born, erased from her life and her mother's story. She set the notice down and picked up another paper, a hospital record this time, dated several years later. Her eyes widened as she read the signature. The name, the same name, appeared again, alive, active, and real. Her hands froze. How could this be possible? Two truths could not exist at the same time. Either he was dead or he was alive. Yet here was evidence of both. Her mind raced. Mistake? Forgery? Impossible coincidence? But she could not convince herself that it was any of those things. A cold fear began to crawl along her spine. If he was alive, then her entire understanding of her mother's life was a lie. If he was alive, then her own memories, her family history, her sense of self, all of it, was built on hidden truths. The thought made her chest feel heavy and hollow at the same time. She pulled the letters closer, rereading the passages that mentioned him. Every word, every photograph, every document now carried a weight she could not ignore. Her mother had hidden him. She had erased him from the world, or at least tried to. And yet, pieces of him had survived, waiting for her to find them. Fear was sharp and cold in her veins. What did this mean? Where was he now? Could he be nearby? The very idea seemed ridiculous, impossible, but the documents suggested otherwise. The past was no longer safely locked in a box. It had begun to reach into the present, into her life. Her thoughts turned inward. She realized that if he was alive, then her mother's decisions, the silence, the secrecy, the distance between them, made a terrible, complicated sense. Every act of protection, every withheld word, every unexplained absence now carried new meaning. Her mother had acted out of fear, necessity, love, and perhaps even guilt. But understanding did not erase the shock, the hurt, or the confusion. She felt betrayed, though she knew she had no right to feel that way. Her mother had done her best under impossible circumstances. And yet, the truth refused to stay buried. She paced the room, her hands trembling, the papers shaking slightly under her fingertips. Every corner of the house seemed to close in on her, pressing with the weight of unspoken histories. She imagined the man in the photographs, real, breathing, living, somewhere in the world, his presence erased from her family's memory but not from existence itself. The fear of encountering him, or even the thought of what it would mean if she did, was nearly unbearable. Rationally, she told herself it could not be. Logically, it made no sense. And yet, the evidence stared her in the face. His name existed. Alive. Persistent. Undeniable. The tension in her chest grew. Her mind screamed at her to stop, to put the papers back, to close the box and let the secrets remain hidden. But another part of her, the part that had been seeking the truth from the moment she opened the first photograph, would not let her turn away. The house felt charged now, as if the walls themselves were aware of the secret she had uncovered. Shadows seemed deeper, corners darker. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind against the windows, carried a new urgency. The past was no longer a story she could observe from a distance. It had become active. It had become dangerous. Her pulse raced as she stared at the death notice and the hospital record, the impossibility of it all sinking in. She realized the past had been lying in wait, patient and unyielding until she was ready, or until it forced her, to confront it. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a shaky breath. The name that should not exist was real. And its existence had the power to change everything. Her understanding of her mother, of her family, and of herself. The past had stepped out of the shadows. And she knew, in the deepest part of herself, that it would not retreat. The house felt smaller now, as if the walls themselves were closing in with secrets she had uncovered. The box on the table, its contents scattered before her, had opened a door she could not close. And yet, the past had begun to spill beyond it. It started subtly. Footsteps outside the window when no one should have been there. The faint creak of a floorboard on the landing above. She told herself it was the house settling, the wind, the imagination. But the unease grew, coiling in her chest like a living thing. Then came the envelope. A simple slip of paper pushed beneath the front door, addressed to her in her mother's careful handwriting. Her hands shook as she picked it up. Inside, photographs she had not seen in the box awaited her. One was the man from the letters and old photographs, standing on a rainy street looking directly at the camera. Something about the image made her heart seize. It was as though he had seen her, even now, decades later. Another photograph showed him standing near a house that was familiar, the trees in the yard identical to the ones outside her own window. Her pulse thundered. Someone was watching. Someone had always been there. She flipped through the new letters in the envelope. They hinted at meetings, fleeting encounters, and eyes that followed her mother's every move. They carried a warning without words. It was not just history she was uncovering. The past had begun to reach forward, brushing against the present. Fear wrapped around her chest like iron. She realized, with a chilling clarity, that she was not alone in seeking the truth. Someone, or something, was still out there. And if her mother's secrets were alive, then the consequences of uncovering them would not remain hidden. Yet even as fear gripped her, curiosity burned brighter. She could not leave the story half told. Every note, every photograph, every trace of that hidden life demanded her attention. She needed to understand, even if understanding came at the cost of peace. Hours passed. The room grew dim, the shadows stretching across the walls like reaching fingers. Her eyes traced the faces in the photographs again and again. Every glance, every posture, spoke of urgency, of choices forced by circumstances she could barely imagine. The past was pressing against her now, demanding recognition, demanding action. And then a knock at the door shattered the fragile quiet. She froze. No one should be here, not tonight. Her hands moved instinctively toward the box, clutching it as if it could shield her from what waited outside. But the knock was followed by silence. When she opened the door, no one was there. Just a hint of wind carrying the scent of rain, a whisper of presence she could not see. She stepped onto the porch and looked around. Empty streets, dark and silent. Yet the sense of being watched did not leave her. The past was not just a story in letters or photographs. It had taken shape. It had become real. Returning inside, she set the envelope and photographs beside the box. Her mind raced with questions, possibilities, fears she could not name. The past was alive, reaching out, brushing against her life. Every unanswered question now carried weight. Every secret, once buried, had teeth. Her mother's choices, once abstract, now felt immediate. The protection, the silence, the careful erasures, they had been necessary. But they had also left her unprepared, vulnerable to the truth that would not stay buried. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands resting on the open box. Shadows danced across the walls as night deepened. Outside, the wind carried a distant rustle, a sound that might have been the trees, or might have been someone moving through them. She knew then that the journey could not be paused. The past was stirring, alive, and inevitable. It demanded confrontation, demanded recognition, demanded that she step forward into the story that had waited so long to be told. And somewhere beyond the photographs, the letters, the walls of the house, she felt it, the presence of someone once erased. Someone who had never truly left. The past had refused to stay buried. And now she had no choice but to follow it. The knock at the door this time was different. Louder. Insistent. She froze, her hand hovering over the knob, heart pounding as if it might leap from her chest. She knew who it could be before she opened it. And yet, part of her could not believe it was real. She turned the handle and there he was. The man from the photographs, the letters, the whispered secrets of a past she had never been meant to uncover. Time had etched lines into his face, but the eyes were the same. Sharp, searching, full of the weight of a life lived in hiding. For a long moment neither spoke. Words seemed inadequate, impossible. Years of questions, anger, grief, and longing collided silently between them. She felt her knees weaken, her hands trembling uncontrollably. The past had stepped into her present, and she could no longer pretend it was just a story. "Why are you here?" she finally whispered, her voice breaking. His expression flickered, pain, relief, and sorrow all at once. "I never left," he said quietly. "I had to disappear. For her, for you, for all of us." The confession hit her like a wave. Every letter, every photograph, every secret she had uncovered now made sense, and yet, it made her heart ache. Her mother's decisions, once frustrating, now carried the unbearable weight of necessity. But understanding did not soften the shock, the grief, or the anger. "You were supposed to be gone," she said, voice trembling. "Everyone thought you were dead. Why all the lies?" He swallowed hard, looking away for a moment. "To protect her. To protect you. There were forces, dangers she never spoke of. I had to vanish. She made me promise to disappear completely. And I kept that promise even when it destroyed me." Her chest tightened. The truth was heavier than she had imagined. Her mother had orchestrated a silence so complete that even the daughter she loved had no idea. And now, the consequences of that silence had arrived, unbidden, impossible to ignore. Tears blurred her vision. Disbelief, longing, and grief collided, creating a storm of emotion she could barely contain. The man's presence, once only in photographs and letters, now filled the room with a weight that was almost suffocating. She wanted to scream, to run, to ask 1,000 questions, yet nothing seemed enough. "Why now?" she asked, voice breaking. "Why appear after all these years?" He stepped closer, hesitant but careful. "Because she's gone. And now, it's time for you to know everything. There are truths that cannot remain hidden any longer, and they concern you too." Her mind reeled. The past she had uncovered, the letters, the box, the photographs, was not the full story. There were pieces still missing, fragments she had yet to see. And now, standing in front of her, was the living proof that her mother's life had been filled with secrets, sacrifices, and impossible choices. I don't know if I can handle this," she admitted, voice trembling. "I've lived my whole life believing one story. And now, it's like everything I know is gone." He reached out but hesitated, giving her the space she needed. "You don't have to handle it alone. I can help. I can answer questions. You deserve the truth." She swallowed, her throat tight, and realized something profound. This confrontation, this reunion, was not just about him. It was about her mother, about the choices that had shaped generations, about understanding why silence had been both a shield and a chain. The room seemed to close in on them, the shadows stretching across the walls as if the past itself had taken shape. The photographs, the letters, the box, all of it led to this moment. A reunion that was never supposed to happen, yet here it was raw, overwhelming, and impossible to ignore. She let herself breathe, small and shaky, feeling the weight of the years and the consequences of silence pressing down. Disbelief, anger, grief, and longing collided, but in that storm she felt the first fragile stirrings of understanding. Her mother had made her choices in love, fear, and necessity, but it was up to her now to navigate the truth, to face the living past, and to begin making sense of what remained. For the first time, she realized that the past was not just a memory, not just a story locked in a box. It had a life of its own, and it had walked into her present, demanding acknowledgement. And now she had no choice but to face it. The man stepped back, giving her a long, measured look. And in that look, she saw both the pain of decades lost and the fragile possibility of closure, or understanding, that might come from finally confronting what had never been spoken aloud. The reunion had happened. The past was alive. And nothing would ever be the same. After he left, the house fell into a silence that felt heavier than noise. It pressed against her ears, against her chest, until breathing itself felt like effort. She did not follow him. She did not stop him. She simply stood there, surrounded by evidence of a life her mother had lived in fragments. The box sat open on the table like a wound that refused to close. For the first time since her mother's death, she allowed herself to feel anger. Not the quiet, controlled kind, but the sharp, burning kind that demanded answers. Her mother had loved her fiercely. That much had always been true. But now love felt tangled with deception, protection twisted into erasure. She sat down slowly and picked up one of the letters again. This time, she read it not as a daughter searching for clues, but as a woman trying to understand another woman's impossible choices. The words felt different now. Her mother had not been reckless. She had been careful. Every letter spoke of fear, of watching over someone from a distance, of staying silent when speaking would have destroyed everything. Between the lines lived a constant tension, between desire and duty, between truth and survival. Her mother had lived two lives. In one, she was a devoted parent, predictable and present, building a world of routine and safety. In the other, she was someone constantly looking over her shoulder, carrying a love she could never acknowledge, guarding a secret that could never surface. Those lives could not touch without shattering both. And so her mother had chosen separation. She imagined the weight of that decision. To love deeply, yet deny that love a future. To protect a child by ensuring another person vanished completely. To wake each day knowing the truth and still smile through ordinary moments, school lunches, holidays, quiet evenings, while carrying a hidden grief no one could see. The realization tightened her throat. Her mother had not been cold. She had been strong in a way that demanded silence. Memories resurfaced with new meaning. The way her mother avoided certain places. The hesitation when old names surfaced in conversation. The moments of sadness that came without explanation. She had always assumed grief came from loss she understood. Now she saw how wrong she had been. This grief had been chosen. And that choice had shaped everything. She realized then that the man who had stood in her doorway was not a ghost returning for unfinished business. He was proof of sacrifice. A living reminder of the cost of protecting one life by erasing another. Her mother had stood between them, between past and future, between love and safety, and absorbed the damage herself. The anger softened into something heavier, sorrow. She wished she could ask her mother why she had never trusted her with the truth. But deep down she already knew the answer. Children were not meant to carry the weight of adult fear. Her mother had believed that silence was a gift, a shield, a way to let her daughter grow without shadows. But shadows had grown anyway. They had simply waited. She stood and walked through the house, seeing it differently now. The walls were no longer just walls. They were barriers her mother had built to keep danger out. Every locked door, every careful habit, every moment of restraint had been part of a larger act of love. Yet love, she realized, could wound even when it meant well. Because now she was left holding truths without guidance. Left to reconcile affection with resentment, gratitude with loss. Left to decide what to do with a living past her mother had spent a lifetime burying. She stopped in her mother's bedroom and opened the closet. At the back, hidden beneath coats that hadn't been worn in years, she found another envelope. This one was thicker, heavier. It had her name written on it. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a letter addressed to her, not meant to be found until the silence finally broke. Her mother wrote about fear. About choices made under pressure. About loving two people in different ways and knowing that one love had to disappear so the other could survive. She wrote about guilt, about regret, but also about certainty. Certainty that this was the only way. She ended the letter with an apology, not for the truth itself, but for the pain of discovering it alone. Tears slipped down her face unchecked. Her mother had known this moment would come. She had prepared for it even while hoping it never would. The past had not returned by accident. It had returned because silence has limits. Because truths buried too deeply eventually demand air. Because love, when denied too long, leaves scars that stretch across generations. Standing there, letter in hand, she finally understood the full weight of her inheritance. Not money. Not property. But unfinished stories. Unspoken truths. Relationships frozen in time, waiting for someone brave enough to face them. Her mother had lived between two lives so that her daughter could live freely in one. Now that balance was gone. And the responsibility had shifted. She wiped her face and took a steady breath. Whatever came next, reconciliation, rejection, forgiveness, or loss, it would be her choice. Not her mother's. Not the past. The box no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a beginning. Her mother had carried the burden as long as she could. Now it was her turn to decide what truth would become, and whether love, once divided, could finally be made whole. Truth did not arrive gently. It arrived like a slow collapse, cracking things that had once felt solid and dependable. In the days that followed, she felt the weight of the secret spreading outward, touching every corner of her life. Nothing was untouched. She noticed it in small ways first. The way her chest tightened when she passed familiar places that now felt altered. The way conversations with friends felt shallow, as if she were holding something too heavy to share. Even sleep offered no escape. Her dreams filled with half-remembered faces and unanswered questions, stitched together by a past that refused to settle. Her mother's silence had not ended with her death. It had simply changed hands. She realized then that secrets did not stay contained. They moved. They aged. They pressed forward until someone finally paid the price. And now that someone was her. The man who had returned, who should not have existed, hovered at the edge of her thoughts. His presence did not feel threatening anymore, but it was not comforting either. He was living proof of what had been taken from both of them. Time, truth, choice. She wondered how many decisions in her own life had been shaped by something she never knew. How often she had chosen safety over risk, distance over closeness, silence over confrontation, mirroring patterns she had inherited without consent. Her fear of abandonment, her need for control, her instinct to walk away before being left. None of it felt accidental anymore. Her mother's secret had not protected her from pain. It had taught her how to carry it quietly. As the realization settled, anger resurfaced, not sharp this time but heavy and exhausted. Anger at the years lost. Anger at being denied the chance to decide for herself. Anger at a truth that arrived too late to fix what it had broken. Yet beneath the anger lived something harder to face: understanding. Her mother had not acted out of cruelty. She had acted out of fear, under pressure she had never shared. And fear, she now understood, could be as powerful as love. Powerful enough to erase a person. Powerful enough to reshape generations. The cost of that fear was now clear. It had fractured relationships before they ever formed. It had created distance where there could have been connection. It had turned love into something conditional and fragile. And worst of all, it had left everyone involved carrying pieces of a story that never quite fit together. She saw it in herself most clearly. The way she struggled to trust happiness. The way she questioned permanence. The way she braced for loss even in moments of joy. These were not flaws born in isolation. They were echoes, passed down through silence and sacrifice. Inherited trauma did not need words to survive. It lived in behavior, in choices, in fears passed quietly from one generation to the next. She thought about confronting the man again, about demanding explanations, about forcing the past to answer for itself. But each time she imagined it, her chest tightened. Truth alone would not heal this. It would only open the wound further. And yet, avoiding it felt impossible. Secrets demanded payment. They always did. And the longer they remained buried, the higher the cost became. Her mother had paid with isolation. He had paid with erasure. Now she was being asked to pay with certainty, with the version of herself she thought she understood. Forgiveness hovered just out of reach. She wanted it. She needed it. But forgiveness felt too large, too final, too undeserved for pain that still felt raw. How could she forgive choices that had shaped her entire life without her knowledge? How could she release anger without dismissing the harm it protected? The answer did not come easily. She returned to the box again, not as a source of answers but as evidence. Proof that love and damage could exist side by side. Proof that intentions did not erase consequences. Proof that silence, no matter how well-meaning, could still wound. For the first time, she stopped asking why her mother had done it. Instead, she asked what she would do next. She could continue the cycle. Keep quiet, avoid confrontation, pretend that knowing changed nothing. Or she could break it. She could speak. She could risk discomfort, uncertainty, and pain in exchange for honesty. The choice frightened her more than the secret itself. Because breaking silence meant stepping into responsibility. It meant accepting that healing would be slow, uneven, and incomplete. It meant acknowledging that some damage could never be undone, only understood. And yet, something inside her shifted. The cost of secrets had already been paid too many times. She refused to add her life to that debt. Forgiveness did not arrive as relief. It arrived as intention. A quiet decision to stop letting fear decide for her. A decision to face what had been hidden, not to excuse it, but to prevent it from controlling her future. She was not ready to forgive fully. Not yet. But she was ready to stop carrying the weight alone. The past had taken enough. The truth did not settle all at once. It lingered, heavy but quieter now, like dust after a storm. She felt it in the pauses between thoughts, in the space where anger had been. What remained was not peace, but something closer to clarity. She began to understand that knowing the truth did not tell her what to do with it. That choice was hers. She stood alone in her mother's old room, where the light fell the same way it always had, soft and careful. Nothing here looked dangerous. Nothing warned her of the weight it carried. Yet this room had shaped her more than she had ever known. Silence had lived here. Decisions had been made here. Love had been hidden here. She spoke out loud for the first time, her voice low and steady. I know now. The words were not an accusation. They were not forgiveness either. They were acknowledgement. A line drawn between what had been hidden and what could no longer be ignored. She felt her mother's presence not as a ghost, but as memory. Complicated. Imperfect. Human. Understanding did not erase the pain. It did not excuse the harm. But it gave the pain shape, and shape made it easier to hold without being crushed. 4 years, she had lived as if her life were something already written, something she had to protect instead of create. Now she saw how much of that caution had been borrowed. How fear had been passed to her like an heirloom she never asked for. She did not want to pass it on. The man from the past remained part of her present, whether she welcomed it or not. But she no longer felt pulled toward him by obligation or guilt. What she felt was choice. The freedom to decide how much space he would take in her life, and how much of her heart she was willing to risk. She understood something else then. Carrying the truth forward did not mean carrying every piece of it. Some things could be set down. Some things could be honored without being relived. She returned to the box again, slower this time. Not searching. Sorting. Photographs went back inside, but not all of them. A few she kept, not because they were painful but because they were honest. Letters were read one final time, then placed carefully in a separate stack. Records and documents stayed behind. They had done their job. They had revealed what was hidden. They did not need to follow her into the future. This was not denial. It was discernment. She realized forgiveness was not something she owed anyone. It was something she chose for herself. And forgiveness, she learned, did not mean forgetting. It meant releasing the need for the past to explain itself forever. She addressed her mother again, quietly, without anger. You did what you thought would protect us, she said. But I will not live the way you had to. There was strength in saying it. Strength in deciding that love did not need to be silent to be safe. That truth did not need to destroy to be real. For the first time she felt the story shift. Not backward, but forward. She would carry empathy but not self-blame. She would carry understanding but not fear. She would carry the truth but not its chains. Her life did not have to be a correction of the past. It could be something new. Forgiveness arrived quietly then. Not as a moment, not as relief, but as permission. Permission to stop replaying what could not be changed. Permission to step into a future shaped by awareness instead of avoidance. She knew healing would not be quick. Some days would still ache. Some memories would still cut. But healing no longer felt impossible. She closed the box, not to hide it but to mark an ending. What she carried forward would be intentional now. Love spoken aloud. Truth faced directly. And the courage to live without letting fear write her story. As she turned away from the room, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Ownership. The next chapter would not be inherited. It would be chosen. The past did not disappear just because she understood it. It stayed, present in quiet moments, in memories that surfaced without warning. But it no longer felt like a force dragging her backward. It felt like something that could finally breathe. She noticed the change in small ways. The house no longer felt heavy when she walked through it. The rooms still carried memories, but they no longer pressed against her chest. Instead, they sat beside her, waiting, no longer demanding. She began rebuilding connections slowly, carefully, without urgency. There were conversations she chose to have and others she allowed to wait. She did not rush to explain everything she had learned. Not everyone needed the full truth. Not everyone was ready to hold it. That too was part of healing. The man from the past remained a presence, but no longer a shadow. Their interactions were cautious, layered with history neither of them could erase. There were moments of shared silence, moments where words failed, moments where understanding passed without explanation. She learned that reconciliation did not mean closeness. Sometimes it meant peaceful distance. She allowed herself to feel grief for what could never be recovered. Time lost. Choices made too early. Paths that had closed before she ever knew they existed. She stopped arguing with those losses. She let them exist. Some wounds did not close neatly. They faded. They scarred. They reminded. And that was enough. She recognized how deeply fear had shaped her mother's life, how survival had demanded silence, how protection had looked like disappearance. And she saw now how that fear had quietly shaped her own. Her caution, her reluctance to trust, her instinct to keep parts of herself hidden. She chose differently. Not recklessly, not without care, but honestly. She spoke when something mattered. She asked questions when answers were unclear. She allowed herself to be seen even when it felt uncomfortable. Especially then. Healing, she learned, was not about fixing the past. It was about refusing to repeat it. There were days when the weight returned. Days when anger surfaced again, sharp and sudden. On those days, she reminded herself that healing was not a straight line. That understanding did not erase emotion. It guided it. She let the past speak when it needed to. Through memory. Through reflection. Through quiet moments alone. But she did not let it take control of her choices. She did not let it decide who she could love or how deeply. She made space for joy without guilt. That was the hardest part. Laughter felt unfamiliar at first, like a betrayal of everything that had been lost. But she learned joy did not erase grief. It stood beside it. Both could exist. Both deserved space. She reconnected with parts of herself that had been waiting. Interests she had abandoned. Dreams she had postponed. She realized how much of her life had been lived cautiously, as if something terrible was always just ahead. Now she walked forward without bracing for impact. She spoke to her mother often, not in anger, not in accusation, but in reflection. Sometimes she thanked her. Sometimes she disagreed with her. Sometimes she simply acknowledged the complexity of the woman she had been. "You were afraid," she would say quietly, "but you loved." That truth did not erase the harm, but it gave it context. And context softened the sharpest edges. The past no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a story that had reached its final chapter, even if its echoes remained. She learned that redemption did not come from undoing what was done. It came from choosing honesty now, from living openly, from refusing silence when truth mattered. She stopped measuring her life against what had been hidden from her. She stopped wondering who she might have been if the truth had come earlier. Those questions led nowhere useful. Instead, she focused on who she was becoming. Healing was ongoing. Some days were light. Some were heavy. But none felt hopeless anymore. She accepted that some losses were permanent. Relationships that could never be rebuilt. Time that could never be returned. Love that would always feel unfinished. Accepting that did not weaken her. It steadied her. She was no longer living in reaction to the past. She was living with awareness of it. The difference mattered. As she looked toward the future, she did not feel the need to define it fully. She allowed uncertainty. She allowed growth. She allowed change. Those things no longer scared her. The past had shaped her, but it would not rule her. It had been acknowledged. It had been understood. It had been allowed to breathe. And now it could rest. She carried forward honesty, courage, and the quiet strength that comes from facing what hurts and choosing to live anyway. Her life was not free of pain, but it was free of silence. And that made all the difference.